Hi, Dr. Spranger here, and I just wanted to talk with you briefly about some pretty rough material, so trigger warning, okay? The subject is intelligent disobedience, but before we get there, we have to talk through the ugliness. What I'm talking about is the recent issues of, I'll just say it, brutality and murder against American citizens by people who are entrusted to protect them. Now, I am a supporter of the US military. I am a supporter of our police forces. But I'm also a researcher. And what I've been observing in terms of organizational behavior is that we have a lack of powerful followership in some organizations, such that it has become necessary that those organizations mandate a duty, an obligation to intervene when, for example, in the police, when one person observes another person behaving in a cruel or inhumane fashion, they now have an obligation to intervene. What would lead to that being necessary? Well, I'll tell you. It's a cultural dynamic. You see, we've been hearing the phrase bad apples applied to people who behave in those cruel and inhumane ways. And sure, that's possible. I mean, statistically, in any organization, there is the possibility of there being someone who demonstrates negative or even psychopathic, sociopathic tendencies. And it's very hard to know that. People don't generally reveal that. They just do what they do. But I think that's rare. I think that that's a lot more rare than what we're hearing. I think that what's more common is, and now I'm going to bring in another theoretical concept, but I think what we're seeing is bad barrels. And Dr. Philip Zimbardo, in his wonderful TED Talk on the Lucifer effect, talked about bad apples, bad barrels, and bad situations. So I want to do away with number one and number three. Bad apples is more rare, it's more diagnostic, and we're sort of leaning on that as a cop-out these days. Sort of saying that's an isolated incident. That's another isolated incident. That's another isolated incident. Statistically, that's not really possible. So what we're actually seeing is the manifestation of a bad barrel phenomenon. And what I'm referring to, of course, is organizational culture. So it is possible to have a bad situation, which is option three. The bad situation, though, is one in which there is no good decision. There is no option in which someone will not be seriously hurt, whether physically, emotionally, financially, career-wise. And the instances we've been seeing in the last year, heck, the last 5 years, they have not been bad situations because there have been positive outcomes available if people made different choices. Do we have to break down this person's door and immediately begin firing such that we end up killing the resident? Say her name, Breonna Taylor. No, they didn't have to make that choice. So that was not a bad situation. That's another manifestation of a bad barrel. What I'm suggesting is, and what we're seeing in the United States right now, is an understanding that perhaps there are some cultural changes that must get made in terms of what the role of policing is in this country. So, I may not necessarily be the expert that police organizations will call on, but maybe Dr. Philip Zimbardo is. They need to look at his material, or another dear friend of mine, whom I know personally, Ira Chaleff, has published largely on followership, and actually more than publications, he's done a lot of consulting around the world with police organizations and military organizations, talking about followership, helping people understand follower dynamic in different organizational contexts, but also specifically making clear the obligation to intervene, or the obligation of intelligent disobedience. And what I mean by intelligent disobedience, what I've taken away from my conversations with Ira Chaleff, is similar to the way we train and expect our service dogs, service animals, to behave. If you are visually impaired and you have a service animal, you trust that animal to contradict you. If you begin to walk out in a street and there's a silent vehicle coming and you don't hear it, but the dog sees it and the dog sits, right? That dog is, of course, not the master, but in that situation, it has more information and it's making a better decision, and the person listens. In the operating room, when the nurse says to the surgeon, who is, at the top of the hierarchy, but the nurse says, wait, Dr. So and so, I think we have, and a piece of gauze still in there, or there's, you need to watch out for the interactions between these two medications, or whatever. When the nurse gives input, it is a wise surgeon who listens to that person, right? When the co-pilot says, hey, buddy, pilot, sir, we're getting information from our control tower that says not to take off right now because there's too much ice on the runway, or there's too much ice on our wings, or whatever. The subordinate person speaking up and advising or informing or even contradicting the senior person, often that inspires such fear that they get shut down quickly. What I'm suggesting is that no matter what role you are in, you should speak up, question, push, and push again if you know that you are observing something that is potentially life-threatening, or it's going to be dangerous or harmful to the organization or to somebody else in the situation. It's worth it. Think about what you're being faced with. Blink a couple of times. Catch your breath because it's probably shocking. And then make a choice and use your voice. We teach that to children, to exercise intelligent disobedience. Thank you again to Ira Chalif. We need to start doing that ourselves. Think, blink a couple of times, make a choice, and use your voice. And don't stop until you get the change that you need done. That's all for now. Thanks a lot for listening.